when Senator McCain was cheerleading the president to go into Iraq. He suggested it was going to be quick and easy. We'd be greeted as liberators. That was the wrong judgment, and it's been costly to us.
Welcome back to Inside Iraq. On the eve of the elections in the United States, the question is, when American voters, they go to the polls, will Iraq be on their mind? With Larry Korb and John Nagl. When you go to the election booth on Tuesday, November 4th, will Iraq be on your uppermost important concern?
It will be, but unfortunately for Americans, we won't, because people are worried about living in their homes, keeping their jobs, their retirement savings going away. That's what they're going to focus on. But really, when you get down to it, the most important thing the president does is foreign policy, and it's the one where he has the least encumbrances from the other branches of government. So I think it's got to be the critical issue, at least for me.
And yet, John Nagl, despite the fact that there is currently a negotiation underway between the U.S. and the Iraqi government about a status of forces, it calls essentially for the major bulk of the U.S. forces to leave Iraq in 2011. But we know the U.S. is going to be in Iraq for many, many, many years to come.
I think that's accurate. So the draft status of forces agreement, which we've seen reports on just today, does suggest that American forces will be out of most of the cities of Iraq by 2009, almost all American combat troops out by 2011. I believe that it is in America's long-term interest and in Iraq's long-term interest for there to be a substantial American presence continuing to conduct training, equipping, and counterterrorism operations from inside Iraqi territory, probably for an additional number of years
and yet that could be a magnet for terrorism, for Al-Qaeda to come back, and for Iraqi resistance to grow.
I think when you have American forces in a country in that part of the world, it will enhance the Al-Qaeda narrative. And I think we have to be very, very careful about how many troops we leave, what their mission is, whether the Iraqi government wants it. I mean, the whole negotiations with the Iraqis have been bizarre, because the Iraqis want us to get out, and we're saying, no, no, you really don't want us to get out. I mean, remember that Prime Minister Maliki wanted 2010. That was his thing. When the Iraqi foreign minister was in this country, he said the same thing. A majority of the Iraqi parliament wrote a letter saying they would not approve a new agreement without a timeline to get out.
There's some domestic politics at play here inside Iraq, and I fundamentally think the United States has mishandled these negotiations. But it's very clear, to me at least, that come 2011, the Iraqi government is going to ask for additional American support for an additional number of years. The Iraqi Air Force currently has no jet aircraft, and the Iraqi government is asked to buy F-16 fighter planes, which it needs. Iraq lives in a dangerous neighborhood, will continue to live in a dangerous neighborhood. Those are the airplanes it wants, but it's going to take 5 to 10 years to develop a capability for Iraq to maintain those aircraft and employ those aircraft on its own. The Iraqi government is going to ask the United States to stay by 2011 for an additional number of years in that training role.
But what happens if they don't?
If they don't, they won't be able to maintain the aircraft.
But again, this is their choice, and I think this is the key thing. We keep assuming we know better. We thought we'd be greeted as liberators. We think that they want us. If they're going to have trouble getting this status of forces agreement through their parliament.
That's true.
And I think this is the key thing. Who are we to tell them what to do? I mean, this week we had the situation where General Odinero said, well, the only reason they're having trouble with the parliament, or one of the reasons, is because the Iranians are bribing them. And Maliki said, what are you talking about? I mean, you can't claim that our people are responding to their constituents.
In that case, Larry, let me just stop you for a second. Is Maliki being honest? Is he playing populist politics by saying, I agree with Senator Obama, 16 months is just exactly the timeline I'm looking for, but he knows deep in his heart of heart, like John said, the Americans are going to be in Iraq for many, many decades to come?
Well, I think Maliki is mainly concerned with keeping himself in power. And I think this is what he's done. I mean, don't forget, I mean, we pushed him in there. He was not the most experienced person, but it was us that pushed him in there. But everything that he's done, as I look at it, is, well, how does he enhance his power base? And I think this is what he's looking at. And he's obviously knows that the majority of the Iraqi people, the majority of the parliament, wants a timeline. When they started this negotiations, the administration said no such thing as a timeline. they've actually had to come around to it, because Maliki knows he can't stay in power without that.
Yeah, that's right. But Maliki also knows that somewhere inside him knows that he is going to need American support, if not for decades, I think perhaps for another 5 to 10 years. And he can get through the next elections. He can demonstrate, and I think he has. Six months ago we were complaining that Maliki was too weak. Today we're saying that he's too strong. So the good news is Iraq is exercising its sovereignty, and the bad news is Iraq is exercising its sovereignty. But it's important to note that come January 1st, we are entering the post-American phase in Iraq. The Iraqi government is going to have a strong new status of forces agreement. It's going to have a lot more control over what American forces do, and America is increasingly going to be backing off.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well,
America using its ability to deleverage Iraq?
Well, I think it's good for the Iraqis to take charge of their own security, but what do our forces do if he turns on the sons of Iraq, these people who we have paid,
He has already.
You know, and basically have allied ourselves with us? Are our forces going to stop the Iraqi security forces from cracking down on these people? I mean, that's basically, we're babysitting a civil war right now. I mean, that's, General McCain, who was the man who pushed the surge, basically has said Al-Qaeda's a spent force. Okay, if Al-Qaeda's a spent force, what exactly are we concerned about? And what will we do if Maliki turns on the sons of Iraq and a civil war breaks out?
Al-Qaeda is not a spent force yet. I was in Mosul about 2 months ago, and there remains a substantial Al-Qaeda in Iraq presence, and that, I believe, is the majority of the suicide bombers and the car bombers continuing to inflict havoc on the people of Iraq. So the continued presence of Al-Qaeda in Iraq is a national security threat to Iraq and to the United States. We have a joint interest together in eradicating that threat. That may continue to take a while.
Above and beyond the Al-Qaeda, the overarching theme in Iraq, it has been since perhaps 2004 until now, this sectarianism, this new monster that is in Iraq. When the U.S. invaded Iraq, they talked about democracy, about liberty, about liberal economy and all that. And what we see right now is religious parties, and we see religion playing such a big dominant role. We see a hermit like Mr. Sistani. He has pretty much a veto over everything. It makes even President Bush envious. Is this what the U.S. bargained for?
Certainly not. And the idea that democracy solves all problems is clearly not correct. And what the history of international relations shows us is that democratizing countries actually have enormous problems going through that process. That process is fraught with peril.
A final question perhaps, John. What would be the major difference between McCain and Obama, if you have to summarize it for me, vis-a-vis Iraq and the election?
I actually think that the combination of the economic problems the United States is facing, the need for more troops in Afghanistan, which is a war that is not going well, and the newly empowered Iraqi government and the status of forces agreement all mean that the two presidential candidates are going to be much closer on actual Iraq policy if they're elected than the campaign rhetoric is indicated.
Larry Korb, this notion that transferring about 2 or 3 brigades from Iraq into Afghanistan is going to solve the situation, according to some military experts, Afghanistan needs 100,000 forces. Is this a policy out of desperation?
Well, more troops in Afghanistan is necessary, but not sufficient to get that place under control. And I think this is what Senator Obama and those of us who opposed this war right from the beginning said, Afghanistan is where you got to focus on it. Remember, Al-Qaeda wasn't in Iraq before we went there, and because we took our eye off the ball, it's not only going to require some more troops, it's going to require complete reorganization. We're finally going to get one military command over there. You're going to have to integrate your aid programs and all of the other things. But the idea that troops alone will solve it, no. And the idea that you're going to use the same strategy as you did in Iraq, no, it's not going to work.
In an answer of yes or no, will the U.S. ever leave Iraq, Larry?
Yes.
John?
Yes, it will. Yes, it will. It'll continue to have an embassy presence.
And it will have influence.
It will continue to have influence forever.
John Nagl from the Center for a New American Security, Larry Korb from the Center for American Progress. Gentlemen, thank you for being guests on Inside Iraq.
Thank you.
To access the show and to send us your comments, please go to aljazeera.net/English. That's all the time we have for this week. Join me next week when we take another look inside Iraq. Until then, goodbye.